numbers here in a minute. Yeah, but anybody have a question? There was a question about HB2 and how it relates to bathroom and beyond.
Yeah, I'd say so.
What are your thoughts on that?
On which part? The gender part that I was actually asked about, the biology, or? I have so many thoughts on HB2, we don't have time for that. Yes.
You'll take the microphone too.
You want the mic
Yeah.
too.
You want to be famous for me?
It's a lot to grasp at one sitting. You don't happen to have this presentation on DVD, do you?
No, but I have it on PowerPoint.
Okay,
Can you give me your email?
okay.
Now,
Posting
yeah,
this too.
there's some poetry in there I worked hard on. So, send it out.
Oh, I'm not going to send it out. This is just
Yes.
from my understanding and grasping of the issue.
I'll be happy to send it out.
Okay, I'll give you my email.
Hang on a minute. Wait a minute.
You mentioned changing your name and birth certificate. You can change the sex on the birth certificate.
Yes and no, depending on where you are. My birth certificate actually says female. So, in regard to HB2, I break the law every time I go to the bathroom. If I'm in a public place. And the reason that my driver's license has changed, it says male, it says Liam Michael Hooper, male. My social security information lists me as male. But I was born in Indiana. And I don't know how much you know about Indiana, but it's a bit scary. And one of the things that you have to do to change the marker on your birth certificate in Indiana is go before a judge in a courtroom and request it. And the vast majority of, they do not typically enter a favorable bench order. And so there you are in public, paying court fees and being humiliated as they deny your right to change your birth certificate. So I can't get a passport. Many people know, depending on where you're born, it's not that big a process. But I was not born here. And most states don't follow the Social Security Administration guidelines. Does that answer your question? Yeah. Do you imagine me handing you my birth certificate?
I don't know if I'm going to use the right terminology, so maybe you can help me with it, but you mentioned that's the surgery that was done on infants at one point in time. Were any follow-up studies done on those infants to find out how they identified as they grew up, given, especially if their gender was changed at birth?
Yes.
And what was the outcome of that?
So, that's a very good question. And again, I would refer you to Anne Fausto Sterling's work if you're interested in these kind of things. There have been multiple longitudinal studies on those children since we became aware that maybe we shouldn't have done that, right? So then there's generations of folks that we weren't able to study because the medical community didn't see it as a problem. Yes?
When did you know who you really were, and how did this go with your parents?
Okay, so short answer, 6. I was 6, I think. And my parents did what good parents did back in the 60s and sent me to a psychiatrist who basically medicated me with a drug called Alum, which is not a bad drug. I'm trying to figure out where the sweet spot is with that thing. Okay, there we go. Elavil in itself is not a bad drug. It's a tricyclic amitriptyline. It's a very good drug. But when you give it to children in adult dosages, it has really devastating effects on your hippocampus, which you need to make informed memories. So throughout most of my childhood, I couldn't really make or retrieve memories, which makes it hard to be a person, right? It's hard to figure out where you're going when you're not real sure exactly who you are and where you've been. And so my story is one of the more difficult ones, I think. But Not the only one. A friend of mine was given shock treatments. He's 2 years older than I am. So, but the thing is, it goes back to this thing about the soul, right? And the soul existing because of, as much as within the body, right? The body knows. There was never a day that I didn't know something was wrong. Never a day. And I was probably, I was well into my 40s by the time I realized that I had lived my whole life in a state of dissociation between myself and my body. Yes.
I've asked with the squiggly. I think you've asked a couple of really critical things for us to think about, but another one I'd like to say, if we're made in the image of God, which some of us might believe, and we're not so sure what God means as shorthand, how fascinating if we're taking a look at soul and self. Oh, God. That's a good one to say. All right.
Are you inviting my thoughts on that? Because I think it would be really groovy if we would all meet back here and talk about this, because we could spend hours on this alone, but I have a thought for you. What if some of that, what we would think of as royal language, right? God speaking of God's self in the plural has something to do with what it means to be in bodies, right? Or what if we were to rethink what it means to be made in the image of God in terms of what is our common nature, such as relationality? This thing in us that is spiritual, that has some soul-based sense of self, right? That is what makes us in the image of God. And so we can look then at the Adam, right? The earth being, who first God makes and sets in the garden and then makes all these other creatures to be in relationship, to be a helpmate to the Adam, and none of them work. It's just not working. Everybody has a mate, but the Adam, and so God said, oh, wait a minute, hang on. I know, let me fix this. And to fix it, divides the Adam into two beings, which wasn't so much about gender or sex, but had everything to do with relationship and our relational nature. So perhaps something to think about at your tables. We are running out of time.
Let me ask this from the crowd. Do you want to break into small groups, or do you want to continue with the Q&A with Liam? Q&A? Q&A? You good for continuing?
What are you going to do?
You ought to stay in
Group
that circle.
conscience.
I think it's critical to look at the two Genesis stories and why there are two. I think in the language of that means that man was made male and female, and then man was made help person. So in the Hebrew, it's not.
Yes.
It is critical to decide. I think that those priestly guys who know that the second story didn't have the balls to throw out the older story, which is actually that there was this incredible creation that had these two components of his own self.
Yeah, I would. So Rabbi Mark and I spend a lot of time together. Some of you know that, and we make jokes all the time about my Jewishness. All right, but I think if you look at the rabbis, right? If you look at the Talmud, if you look at any of the other sacred writings for Judaism, because they are sacred, right? They're discernment. They're wrestling with the text. There's always anywhere from 10 to 15 different opinions about one word in the text. Why? Because God is in the questioning. God is in our seeking, right? Not in our sense of we absolutely know it all. Then why would we need God? If we had it all sewed up and we had everything figured out and we were oh so smart, why would we even need God? Because we would be sufficient. And the story of the Adam split open, the trans Adam, is really about the message that self-sufficiency is absolutely not the way of God. And so we need both stories. We need all those stories so that we're continually forced to wrestle and to ask and to seek the answers for ourselves. Yes, Peggy?
I wanted to follow up just a little bit on when you said that you knew when you were 6 years old that you were different and that you said something was wrong. So my question is, there have to be, and I'm sure there are, and you probably know the answer to this, how many, or not how many, but where are the support systems for children, at least in this community, who are young or who are in middle school or high school, who are struggling with these issues, and where can they be safe to be able to have some conversation with people who, like yourself or others?
Okay, so politically correct answer. Not. I'm just kidding. There isn't much of anything. For those of you who want them because you think you might have reason to use them, if you will email me, I will be happy to send you a list of gender specialists in the area. But there are not many. And some of the people, you have to be very, very careful because there are some people who will bill themselves as gender therapists and gender specialists, and what they're really trying to do is get you to act right in your skin like they did me. That is absolutely the last thing that you want to do. So for those of you who want that information, I'm happy to do that. And as you know, Peggy, and some of the others of you know, I don't ever stop doing this work, right? So if I get an email and I'm sitting with my phone, it's 9 o'clock at night, and you're asking me for contact information for somebody, it's probably within an hour or two I'm going to answer it. And that doesn't mean that I don't take care of myself, right? That I don't do stuff just for me. It means that this is what I do. Anything I can do to get people to where they need to be so that they don't suffer like I and my peers did, and the people before me, and the people before them, then, I've had a good day. But that's a really long answer. And the other part of that really long answer is that we now live in a state that is a police state where we're inviting public policing and vigilantism in regard to public restrooms. So are children safe? No. And the school systems that are, the schools within certain systems that are trying to make safe places have just gotten it a whole lot harder for them to do that. Does that help at all, Peggy? Okay. Hang on.
So in addition to your parents sending you to a psychiatrist or whatever the pharmaceutical treatments were, what was your faith background at that time as you were, recognizing who you were, and do you see any changes either from then to now, what's happening in, open and welcoming LGBT community worship spaces? So you see, it's a two-part question.
Yeah. Y'all hold me accountable for trying to hold both those parts, okay? So first of all, we did not have in our household what I would refer to as a really active and present sense of faith or God or understanding of that with my parents anyway. And so thankfully though, my mother's mother, who is Scottish, we're Macintoshes, which means we're Jacobites. But that's important because we're warrior people. We came over here strictly to fight the British after we were run off our own land. And seriously, my group of Macintoshes, that's why we came. And we married Creek Indians. So my grandmother was Scottish Creek. And she never told me that in so many words. But she told me that in everything that she taught me about God, right? She would use things like hummingbirds to teach me about grace and resilience and the way that we can constantly be in motion and still be still. She would use things like geodes to teach me not just about God, but about human beings and how we don't really know how truly beautiful people are until they're broken open. She taught me about God through the natural world. And as I grew older, I realized that she taught me the way, right? She taught me our native way. She taught me the way of the Macintoshes. And I carried her spirituality with me. So after the death of my brother, my folks went to church, right? Because that's what you do when you lose a baby. So it would seem. And I never felt really at home there. But eventually we went to a Baptist church, and I tried to fit in. And by then I was in my teens, and it was just hideous. I mean, it was awful. All the messages I got about, we love you as long, oh, but don't make a big deal out of this. Don't get too uppity. You know, stay in your place. Of course, you know, that we were in the South then too, so, you know, it's kind of hard to split those hairs, right? But I knew always, throughout my whole life, there was always this sense, particularly at the darkest of nights when I'd be alone, you know, drinking, because I'm a drunk, right? I have almost 30 years sober. But so I started drinking when I was 12. But there was always this sense of something holding me, right? And some sense, if you just hang on, if you just wait till morning, it's going to be all right. And I believe that was God, right? That's what I believe. I believed it then, and it was that belief that allowed me to stand up to the church and to stand up to my parents and to stand up to the abuse and say, I'm not coming back because God loves me. The real God, the God that abides with us, loves me. And I don't know who you people are worshiping, but you can do it by yourself. I'm not coming back. And I was like 15 or 16 when I did that. So it's been a process over the years of reconciling my sense of God, the God Grandma gave me, and these things we call sacred texts, and these things we call Christian tradition, or Jewish tradition, or Islam. Or I'm an old religion guy who's really tried to figure out how to create a ministry of that in the church at large, whatever that really means. So you can do what you want to with that. I don't know really what that means. And, you know, I'm still wrestling with my Jewishness. But so, you know, because they're going to ordain me at Parkway on July 10th, so I should probably just think through that some more. But anyway, thank you. That's really more about Parkway. And it's really more about the way God moves in the world, right? To give us nest, to give us home. So, faith communities. The United Church of Christ has the ability to be open and affirming. The Methodists have Reconciling Ministries Network, and that's sort of working, not always working so good. What's the Baptist one? Thank you. Yes.
Repeat it.
Welcoming and affirming. Then we have New Light Presbyterians. We've got, what else is there? Huh? More like, yeah, more like Presbyterians. So there's a bunch of them. Does that, okay.
This is something that I just encountered on Sunday. A friend on Facebook welcomed her daughter who had just completed her transition from Maria to Victor. And I wasn't sure what to say, in terms of supporting all of this, and Googled, the appropriate thing to say when someone's completed their transition. I know this sounds really weird, but I didn't want to say anything offensive, but is there anything appropriate to say in a situation like that? Okay, because I read that congratulations wasn't quite it, but I wasn't sure.
So, aside from my hallelujah and praise the sovereign and pass the daisies, I think you just say, great. Sometimes less is more, but also I think it's okay to just, give a heartfelt celebratory yay, And then odds are good if this is a person you're in relationship with, there's going to be a whole lot of opportunity to have dialogue about that. And I feel certain that you'll know what to say when that happens.
Can you say a little more about the legal action you're contemplating against HB2 ignorance in our police state?
I'm just saying, I think if all the other measures fail, which this sort of looks like, I don't know how that's going to go. I think one option that we have is to legalistically challenge the law based on the verbiage, right? Because the verbiage is contradictory. First of all, it says that you cannot go into a restroom
Probably was better if you're back.
that doesn't match your birth gender. So it'll say that, your biological gender. The law says biological gender. And then it will say, uses both pieces of verbiage, right? Biological gender, whatever that means, and then gender on birth certificate. And many of us feel they did that on purpose, that they knew what they were doing, right? Because what they did was offer us up on the altar of deflection politics, right? Y'all know that. It was just to get people focused on the rapists and the pedophiles, right? So that they could pass in all this stuff that's anti-worker, anti-person, just despicable legislation, right? And so I think, and many of us think, they knew what they were doing. That if they said birth certificate, first of all of you would say, well, how in the world would you enforce that? What are we all going to do? Shrink down our birth certificates and laminate them, and we're going to have the bathroom police, which is exactly the point. If you're worried about enforcing this law, you're not paying attention to what else they're doing, first of all. And secondly, it invites public policing and vigilantism, because who are they going to be looking for? They're going to be looking for those persons who, for various reasons, mostly, let's be frank, okay, but mostly in regard to persons who would have, predictably they think, which is in itself racist and sexist and classist, right? But there's an assumption about who has better access to surgeries and hormones consistently, right? And the assumption is that people of color do not. And in many cases, that's the case. The assumption is that most trans women will not be able to afford the massive amounts of cosmetics and other things that they need to do to pass. Even though lots of us question if passing is what we really need to be doing, that's a whole other issue, right? But there's this assumption about who has access to resources, which we know those persons who have the most access to the most resources are typically white, cisgendered males who are heteronormative, right? So anybody who's not them is not likely to be able to pass. And so you will all be looking out for those folks who don't pass. They're not concerned about enforcing the law. They're concerned about creating discord and division and violence. Because then we're not watching with it's smoke and mirrors, right? But the problem with that is that these are people, they're people, and lives are on the line. Does that answer your question at all? Okay.
While North Carolina is now the poster child, and we get on international news, et cetera, my sense is that we're going against history and against where things are moving in the rest of the country, and I have a sense of being more hopeful about that, and that reactionary is their own fear and denial, et cetera. Do you have the same kind of hope for that things are moving for more acceptance and grace?
It would be you, Truman, that asked me the hard one, right? Okay, so firstly, yes, I have hope, but in a different capacity than people might expect, right? In the sense that I always have hope because I believe with every fiber of my being that the grace of God, the arc of that grace, rises high and reaches far and catches all of us. So that regardless of what happens in the world, many of us, not all of us, but many of us are able to sense some abiding and survive, right? So that's the kind of hope I have. Having said that, I do think there is also an arc sweeping the country of deeper understanding, right? That we're starting to really grapple with and interrogate and dissect this whole concept of humanness and selfness and, bodies and all that stuff in a way that is really positive and helpful to us all. But I think what, folks like you and me of certain generations, right? Those of us over 50, those of us over 60, also know that as the pendulum of human permissiveness and acceptance swings one way, the response to that swings pretty far too. It's just basic physics, right? Equal and opposing response. And so we get things like HB2 and the Death Star legislation in Michigan, right? So, which our legislature was looking at. They were looking at that legislation as a model and ran out of session time. So it's pretty much the only reason that we got what we got.
Can you say more about Death Star?
Death Star is a sweeping legislation and that they're dealing with in Michigan that is very much like HB2, only much more comprehensive, much more restrictive, and it's hideous.
But it wasn't passed.
No, but they continue to. It is the model, right? Among certain parties, it's the model of what we should be doing.
How did you get that name?
Is everybody familiar with what Death Star means?
Yeah, that's
or
what
where
I
it
do.
comes
Yeah.
from?
Oh, Death Star from Star Wars. It's where it gets. It's a Star Wars reference.
But what does it mean? I'm sorry.
It means a weapon that can annihilate an entire planet. Pretty much. Yeah, isn't
So
it?
there is a state
Well, that's what
powers.
that's what the opponents of it are calling it. They don't call it that. Kind of like Reverend Barber and some of us refer to HB2 as hate bill 2. It's pejorative, not descriptive, maybe.
Said with a painful heart, I spent my whole life in the United Nations and the Commission and Subcommission for the Prevention of Discrimination and Protection of Minorities, unpaid, sick, and with no money. This is my life. It isn't what I do, it's who I am. And that's one of the reasons I admire you. So I don't think it's what you do. I think it is who you were called to be, and you are. However, what I have seen over and over again, and I ask, because I'm picking it up, I am white, I am female, I am a lover of God, I am a person. Do you know one person hugged me? There is a gross reverse discrimination, and I beg all of us in this room looking at ourselves that we watch for that virus. It sneaks up. When the African Americans came to Geneva, and I was representing the first commission for the Africans to have work after being tortured and so on, they were disrespectful to me because I was white and American, and they presumed, being a Spalding, rich. They were thrown out of the meeting. I beg you, because I see it and I smell it. It is a spiritual virus. It can sneak into any group. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else have a question? I knew it was coming. I can see it.
Liam, I've seen you in several contexts now, all of them quite recent, because I've become involved in my daughter's life in a different way than I had before. Is your life all built around what we've been talking about, or do you have an experience that isn't surrounded by these issues?
Okay, so I think really what you're asking me is my whole identity about being trans, really, and about advocacy and activism and all that. And so my answer to that is no, it's not, right? This is not all I am or all that I do, but it is who I am. Right? For me, it's not just about transness and trans advocacy and education, it's about justice, period. I'm constantly consumed with being curious about how we address injustice. So that means solidarity with queer people of color, LGBT people of color, trans people of color, Latinx people, as if there's some difference between brown and black bodies and yellow bodies and red. But, you know, that's another political correctness thing that people didn't choose, right? So that, and I really okay, so probably the main reason I have not converted to Judaism is because I cannot let go of this Jesus from Nazareth guy and his just persistent need to reform, right? To constantly rabble-rouse us into looking just a little bit askance at things, always in favor of the least of the least of these. And that is who I am, right? I was the kid who was too small to champion the kids on the playground, but did it anyway, you know? I came home beaten and bruised because somebody was picking on me, but usually just as often because somebody was picking on somebody else. You know, I don't know any other way to be. And, you know, at the same time, I think for me, what it's really about, for me, what my life is really about is this sense that I still am just not done reaching for God. And no matter how much I sense God, it's still never sufficient. Does that make sense? And so there's this need to just keep working with that, and where I find that begins to be satisfactory is with people and with the least of these, and in the human interaction and in that space between us where God shows up and where all manner of stuff that is messy and, you know, undefined and kind of leaky at times and just, you know, hard to pin down is where I find God. And I just really don't know what else I would do. I make furniture in the wood shop and stuff, but it's not that good, so it's not like I could make a living at it. Or, you know, I'm trying to teach myself to play the mandolin, you know, but I don't do that real well either. And I was too poor to go get a PhD, so, you know, I can't make any money being an academic. And so I don't know what else I would do. All humor aside, I don't know what else I would do.
You got
Is there
time
anything
for,
else you would want to do? I mean, really?
Well, you know, yeah, I mean, in a weird, no. I mean, I would love to go to, I'd love to go to Scotland. I'd love to go to Machu Picchu, right? I'd love to be at Angkor Wat. You know, but is there something else I would rather do in the world, like for my living or for my profession? No, I did some of that, and I don't ever want to go back to. If I thought the only thing I had left to do was go back to the mental health system, I think I'd run away.
What's beyond your ordination?
Hopefully grant money to pay me to do things like we're doing now. And if not, well, I'll just keep doing what I do.
So you don't have an interest in actually pastoring a particular congregation?
No, because then that would take me away from congregation of the world, right? I'm a congregation of the world, liturgy of the world kind of guy. The box creeps me out a little bit. You know, to be quite honest. I know you get that, True. Okay.
We have time for maybe 2 more questions. Anything else?
Y'all are asking deep questions. I'm going to need a nap when I get home.
Yes, Jerry.
Yes, Jerry.
Is what is happening in the Divinity schools to prepare future ministers to address these issues? And secondly, what is happening in our public schools to address the needs of the children?
I am utterly and completely incapable of answering that question. I think, so here's what I can say. And it's not just because Chris is in the room. What I see happening more is what happened to me, and I think it's the most important thing that can happen. When I applied to, you know, as a sort of getting old guy, or older, to go to Divinity School at Wake, I applied saying to them very clearly, you know, I am transmasculine. I will be initiating transition. This is part and parcel of my call. You know, this idea of transcendent becoming, right? Of always being becoming, and that being in part related to or because of or in tandem with our growing understanding of ourselves as spiritual beings and our understanding of our relationship with God and others, right? Transition is about all of that, and ministry is about all of that, right? So I was very upfront with them, and I took my first shot of testosterone in August. I turned 49 in September when I started class. And I spent 3 years in Divinity School wrestling with how to do this thing in community and being supported and challenged and sometimes deeply and profoundly hurt. But that allowed me to be deeply and profoundly reconciled and to engage relationships I otherwise would not have, and had the deep honor, you can yell at me later, the deep honor of having been in relationship with people like Chris, who held space for me in that and held me accountable, but also held the difficulty. And I think we were all utterly transformed by that, right? And so then there was another person after me. and another person after him. And what I see happening in our preparatory institutions is more and more of us are getting in. And more of those institutions are willing to be in the mess that it is to be a person. And really, I think what trans people have to offer us, one of the gifts we have to offer, which we didn't have time to talk about, I think there's a lot of gifts, but one of them is that we just boldly give you this undeniable, visible, imperfect, vulnerable, flawed, and yet willing to keep showing up way of entering the mess of what it is to be a person and to be a person in community with other persons trying to be persons in community, right? Does that answer your question, Jim?
First part.
Then at public schools,
Part to the public schools. And,
Well, but that was the preparatory.
yeah, I don't have a sense of there really being much out there. I just don't. And some of us constantly reach out to them and say, we will come and educate you. Invite us in, let us come and speak. And they don't.
I can add to that, that I know of several instructors, educators in elementary and middle schools that, and high schools that are LGBT, either themselves or allies.
Yeah.
And so having supporters like that already in there in the system, that is what we're doing behind the scenes, if you will.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I appreciate that because I think, again, that's the other thing, right? Infiltration, Jerry, is the way, right? Sneaking in under the radar and then shaking. Because really, that's how this being a person thing happens, right? And it's how being a community happens. And learning to be in community is sort of just infiltrating and getting in there and willing to stay at the table, as we say in the UCC.
and reverse infiltration.
Yes. Yeah.
For those who aren't.
Yes.
We join those who are.
Yeah, and we love you for it.
Could we maybe have a moment of us in some form of Thanksgiving for this gathering?
Would you like to offer a prayer to pray?
Well, I don't think that I think we did all kinds of prayer. What do you guys think? But
Amen.
I am open for. It's not that I'm opposed to praying in public, but this has all been about me for a minute. I don't think we need to do that. So there are many of us who are capable. Do any of you feel moved to give thanks for the space and send us out of here?
I'll offer one, please. I might need a little help. So in Judaism, there's a prayer called Shekianu, which is thanking God for allowing us to reach this time and place. And anybody wants to join me in Hebrew, and then we can do it. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, Shekianu, V'kiyanu, V'hikianu, Lazman hazeh. And thank you, Gail, help me. Thank you, God, for allowing us to be here at this moment and at this time.
Thank you.
All right, and I thank you all for coming out tonight. Liam, thank you.